We're here in French Camp, Mississippi, which is an old Mississippi town. It's actually older than our state capital, Jackson, and it's older than the actual state of Mississippi. It was founded in 1810 by a guy named Louis LeFleur. And Louis LeFleur is the person that we're going to talk about today. He was a guy who started to become a real folk hero in the 20th century as Mississippians were wanting some founding fathers of their own. They started to create stories of Louis LeFleur. They said he was Canadian, and he was such a great dancer that he changed his name to LaFleur.
French for the flower, because he danced like a flower in the wind.
These stories about Louis LeFleur started to be published in newspapers and in books, and they really painted Louis LeFleur out to be this kind of larger than life, but kind of a ridiculous person. He was this socialite who would attend all the balls and dances in Canada. He was this man who was obsessed with dancing and was light on his feet, and he met his wife, Rebecca Cravat, in the forest as she was withdrawing refreshing water from a stream, and he wooed her in the forest, and they fell in love. And he dressed in buckskins and had a long beard and lived in a log cabin. So there were all of these details about Louis LeFleur that were published, but they really weren't that accurate. So today we're here in French Camp, which is actually called French Camp because Louis LeFleur created this little town, and we're going to talk about the real Louis LeFleur and who he actually was. So Louis LeFleur was actually not Canadian. He was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1762. So this is pre-revolution. This is the first century of the French settlements along the Gulf Coast. And LeFleur was actually born LaFleur or LaFleur. So he had his name from his birth. He didn't get named that because he was dancing like a flower in the wind. And LeFleur was an Indian trader. So he was a French man. He was born to a French soldier and a French woman. His mother was actually from Mobile, so she was born in Mobile, but his father was actually a French soldier. And Louis started to trade on the Pearl River. The Pearl River is a river that kind of moves all the way up north to south through the state of Mississippi. And back in those days, in the late 1700s, this was the heart of the Choctaw country. So the Pearl River would take you straight up through the Choctaw country. And he would trade with the Indians, the Choctaw Indians. He would take things back and forth from Mobile. He began to identify with the Choctaw, and he most likely started to dress like the Choctaw. He definitely spoke the Choctaw language. He lived among the Choctaw, and he actually did marry Choctaw women. So Rebecca Cravat, who's always known as his wife, was actually a Choctaw woman. She was the niece of Pushmataha, the Choctaw chief. But one little detail that kind of gets left out of his sanitized story is that he actually married multiple women. He married Rebecca Cravat and Nancy Cravat, who was Rebecca's sister. And some of the accounts say that he married one and then she died and then he married another, but it's plausible that he actually married both sisters at the same time. Polygamy was accepted in Choctaw society, and it's likely that he actually married both of the women. So he did some wooing. He also fathered at least 11 children, and probably more, and with at least 3 different women. So he did do some wooing. So even though LeFleur had been living among the Choctaw, he maintained a connection to his French culture and his native Roman Catholic religion. He had the names of his children entered into the records book at the Catholic Church in Mobile. And he actually spent time living in Pass Christian, Mississippi, which is a beautiful little beach town in Mississippi today, in between his time of living among the Choctaw up here in the Choctaw country. Louis LeFleur, how did he earn his fortune? He was a trader, an Indian trader, and he was actually contracted by the Mississippi government, the early Mississippi Territory government, to deliver goods to the Choctaw and to move things back and forth along the rivers. He also was a cattle rancher. So he was, as settlers came into Mississippi, they brought the European stock animals that were unknown in these parts before settlers came here, and that was cattle. And he was also a slave owner and a cotton grower, so he participated, even at that very early era, he participated in that slave labor that Mississippi and the South would become known for. So he did become very rich. He did have a lot of children, and he really did help found the state of Mississippi. When the state government was looking for a place to create their state capital, they actually chose Louis LeFleur's stand in what's today Jackson, and they put the city of Jackson there because he had a stand there. What was a stand? In the very early settler days, there was no infrastructure for a European who wanted to move to the frontier. So a stand was almost a hostel where you could sleep for the night, get a meal, stable your horses. It was just kind of like a little oasis of civilization among a pretty wild and foreign culture. So Louis LeFleur had a stand here at French Camp, and that's why this town is called French Camp. And he had one in Jackson, which, if you've ever been to Jackson, LeFleur's Bluff is named after Louis LeFleur's stand there, and it's where he had his stand there. So Louis LeFleur, the accounts call him a war hero and a Choctaw chief. He probably wasn't a chief, although he was definitely a rich and powerful man among the Choctaw. But he actually was a war hero. He knew Andrew Jackson. He actually served under Andrew Jackson in a Choctaw regiment in the War of 1812 with Pushmataha, the famous Choctaw chief. And he served in the Creek War in the Pensacola campaign in 1814 and 15. So he was a bona fide war hero. He was lauded for valor in the field, so he didn't just serve, he actually distinguished himself. So Louis LeFleur, if we look at his life, he was actually a real person who did a lot of things and had a really big impact on early Mississippi. He wasn't this kind of silly character who was obsessed with dancing and this and that. He probably, when he died, he actually identified himself as of the Choctaw Nation. So he probably considered himself a Choctaw by adoption, more so even than a French person. But he definitely would have identified as that kind of European or early settler as well. And he actually had a very famous son, Greenwood LeFleur, who turned out to be one of our great early Choctaw representatives in the state of Mississippi. And Greenwood, the city of Greenwood, and the county of LaFleur are both named after Greenwood. So he had a massive impact on Mississippi even after he passed away with his progeny. So that's the story of Louis LeFleur. And now here we are exploring his little town in Mississippi, which is still, it almost feels like you could be back in time listening. It's right on the Natchez, literally right on the Natchez Trace. And it almost feels like you could go back in time and imagine what life was like as Louis LeFleur lived here along the Natchez Trace. So that's our story of Louis LeFleur. And if you want to learn more about him, you can check out our book, The Hidden History of Jackson, where we tell the story of LeFleur and tell many other stories about Jackson. So thanks for listening, and check out our next video.